It's been a while, but we're honored to have with us Colonel Tom Rempfer, who we've been involved with over the years on the COVID vax mandate in the U.S. military and the airlines, et cetera. Tom, thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks, L. Todd. Appreciate it, sir.
So I wanted to get you on because I think you're one of the leaders of this movement as far as pushing back against the illegal COVID mandates. And as I told Mark Bashaw Friday, Secretary Hegseth said the magic words illegal order. What say you?
Yeah, he actually used the terminology unlawful order, but it doesn't really matter. For all practical purposes, they are synonymous. And I've been tracking Lieutenant Bashaw's case, the great injustice that was done to him, completely arbitrary and capricious prosecution of that young man. And so I would like to discuss his case a little bit more.
Yeah, please, let's jump right in. I mean, we kind of talked about the ramifications with Mark, but not really the past. Do you want to give a elevator pitch of what actually happened to him?
Yeah, I think a primer on the historic illegality of medical mandates by the Department of Defense is instrumental.
Okay.
And so, my story unfortunately goes back 30, years almost in challenging the anthrax vaccine program. And we were very fortunate that it took a long time, much longer than this COVID debacle has taken. But ultimately, the various branches of the government ended up agreeing with us that the anthrax vaccine program was illegal. The House Government Reform Committee had put out a report that said that the program was being implemented in conflict with the law, and that was in 2000. So long time ago, a few years later, the federal courts chimed in and concurred, validated our original concerns about the illegality of the anthrax vaccine mandate in the military. That the vaccine had not been properly licensed, and therefore it wasn't, as the Department of Defense and the government was claiming, a safe, effective, and FDA approved. It was not, and the program was enjoined. And in an uncontested court case, ultimately the plaintiff's attorneys were paid. That doesn't happen unless you're the prevailing party. And as the court said, the government was not substantially justified. The program was patently illegal. Unfortunately, we didn't seem to learn lessons from that, and that leads into the COVID era. Fortunately, once again, entities of the government listened. It took a while, took too long, and they ended up, not only did the legislature end up rescinding the COVID mandate, but now the Secretary of Defense has actually admitted that the mandate was unlawful. So, basically this entire sordid tale is an example of success. Government entities, the branches of the government listening, taking too long, but ultimately listening and determining that these medical mandates were unlawful, illegal. And so that's happened with both the anthrax vaccine mandate as well as the COVID mandate. And so now it's time to correct the records. I've been a longtime advocate for correcting records for anthrax veterans. There were at least 37 court-martials, thousands of non-judicial punishments, and a variety of other judicial punishments. They should all be corrected because the program was patently illegal. President Trump tried to do that in 2018, actually put down guidance through the White House. From the White House, the intent was to correct records of anthrax-era veterans and the injustices that were meted out against them with punishments, dishonorable discharges, fines, jail time. And so, unfortunately, those 2018 corrections ended up being undermined by the Department of Defense. They put out a memo. They didn't even mention anthrax vaccine in the memo. It was supposed to correct errors, injustices, and inequities. They fully corrected a couple records out of the thousands of troops that were punished. But ultimately, the Department of Defense undermined it, obscured it, obstructed it. And once President Trump was gone, the Biden DoD basically halted all corrections. And so I'm very hopeful that the Department of Defense and the executive branch, hopefully the President of the United States, will order those corrections to finally happen for anthrax era veterans, as they are now happening. The precedent is incredible. It's happening for the COVID era veterans. And so from the perspective of the primer, I just wanted to mention that there was an original law, Title 10, Section 1107 of the U.S. Code, that said that you can't mandate experimental or investigational vaccines on the troops. That's what they violated with the anthrax vaccine mandate. And then after the anthrax vaccine mandate was declared illegal by the federal courts, Congress handed the Department of Defense a new law, the Emergency Use Authorization. So while the vaccine was unlicensed, the courts did allow, it was memorialized in the Federal Register, for the Department of Defense to use an emergency use authorized, unapproved medical product on the troops. But it had to be voluntary. Absolutely no penalty is what it says in the Federal Register. No punishment, no loss of benefit or entitlement. So the Department of Defense knew full well what the requirement was in utilizing an emergency use authorized drug product. And the very first ever EUA, emergency use authorized unapproved medical product, was anthrax vaccine because the courts had declared it illegal and forced the Department of Defense and the Food and Drug Administration to actually license it properly. Anthrax vaccine was the first ever EUA. It was absolutely voluntary. That same standard should have been applied to the COVID shots. Unfortunately, when the Department of Defense put out guidance for the COVID mandate, they actually executed proper guidance. They said that the licensed product was the only thing that could be mandated, but there was no licensed product. There was only emergency use
authorized. So that was intentional. That was a sleight of hand, correct?
It seemed like preparing a memo, a directive by the Secretary of Defense that was actually legal, saying that the EUA drug was voluntary and that they could only mandate FDA-approved product, which they didn't have. It didn't exist throughout the entirety of the mandates. It seemed like they were going to implement it properly, but unfortunately, the execution of the mandate at all levels of the chain of command ended up being a mandate for the EUA product, which was an absolute violation of the law and an absolute violation of the SecDef's directive. So that's where we get into the arbitrary and capricious nature of the sanctions. There were over 8,700 soldiers that were given less than fully honorable general discharges. They lost their earned education entitlements, and they had basically bad paper from the Department of Defense. That's what our Secretary of Defense and our president have said, hey, we're going to fix this. And it's historic that the Secretary of Defense has actually admitted that the mandate was unlawful. No less historic than the judiciary finding the anthrax vaccine mandate illegal. So all these historic events are very important, and we should be having the discussion about them. To me, it's absolutely fascinating that at the national media level, there's been literally no discussion, almost no reporting, a few alternative media attempts to explain that the Secretary of Defense has found the mandate to be unlawful. But by and large, the mainstream media didn't cover it at all. I'm going to be gracious and just assume that they do not understand the significance, just like with the anthrax vaccine mandate. They don't understand the seminal significance of the Secretary of Defense saying that a mandate that impacted over 2 million U.S. soldiers was unlawful. It's very important, and it goes to the necessity to correct records. So they're going to correct records for the 8,700 that were given general discharges. Now they've actually added additional guidance that they're going to expunge all adverse personnel actions. They're going to upgrade all discharges, and they're actually going to address career setbacks. This is very important as far as making our troops whole. But I also want to focus on the incredibly unique case against Lieutenant Bashaw.
Before we move on to that, I want to ask you, and I've asked you this before, and I know you're being gracious, as you say, but you have a situation where twice the DoD has essentially pressed with I would say, almost a diabolical agenda of vaccinating all the troops with an unlawful product twice. That's pattern recognition, right? So what is the agenda? Is it money? Is it testing? Is it clinical trials? I mean, why would they do this, do you think?
So I think that there is a very disturbing biopharmaceutical, biodefense enterprise cartel behind all of this. And, I don't think that those entities are on their face, evil, or what they're doing is knowingly illegal. Instead, they're manipulating this propensity for the Department of Defense to kind of go along with these mandates for drug products. Try to imply that these drug products are fully FDA approved when in both cases they were not. So therefore, in both cases, they were patently illegal. So I've always tried to be a little bit agnostic when it comes to intentionality. What's the motive?
You are. Yeah.
What's the motive? To me, I don't really care about that. I care about the fact that you broke the law, you harmed our troops. These unapproved medical products, in both cases, the anthrax vaccine isn't even recommended by the Centers for Disease Control. They recommend simple antibiotics. Simple treatments were always available. Similarly with COVID, the entire population, the world knows that the COVID unapproved medical products essentially did not work, and there's very serious safety signals. So my objective at this point is to encourage the Department of Defense and the executive branch to now follow through on correcting the records and making sure that they fix what they did to the troops, not only to the troops that they punished. Those troops need to be made whole. They need to fix it all. But also for the troops that fell ill. There's a lot of troops that did have adverse health consequences from the shots. They need to take care of those troops. They need to add both anthrax vaccine and the COVID shots to the PACT Act, the promise to address comprehensive toxins. And they need to make sure that they care for these ill troops. So that's one route.
Which includes testing, which includes, checking to see if young men who got the vax are harmed. They may not know if they are. There could be heart issues. There could be a lot of issues.
Yeah, well, it's not just could. I mean, they are real, and so fortunately, it's taken too long. But fortunately, our Food and Drug Administrations and Centers for Disease Control acknowledge the myocarditis, pericarditis, other neurological, immunological, thrombotic problems from the vaccine. So not only does this impact our entire population, but my focus is the troops. Care for the troops, correct their records. And if it's okay, I'll skip back to the case of Lieutenant.
Yeah, and after that, I want to talk about how we get accountability. But go ahead.
Sounds good. Yeah, sounds good. The accountability piece is really important. Medical accountability happens by caring for the troops and adding these toxins to the PACT Act. Accountability within the chain of command happens from the Secretary of Defense and his convening authorities. My focus is positive record corrections for our troops. Right. Their job is actual strategic accountability. You had willful, coordinated law breaking by Department of Defense officials at all levels of the chain of command. I would hope that they do extract some form of accountability to address that coordinated willful blindness by our chain of command in blatantly violating the law, our troops' health rights. Hundreds, if not thousands of troops put in Inspector General's complaints to the Department of Defense explaining exactly what and why the COVID shots were illegal to mandate. Clearly, the Secretary of Defense has come to this conclusion that it's unlawful. There's obviously been a deliberative process within the Department of Defense where he came to this conclusion. And so I think it would be important to have that conversation with the American people. More importantly, I think it would be important to have that dialectic with all of the troops, every commander. They need to understand why this mandate was illegal. Beyond just the public admission that it was unlawful, I think that there needs to be the conversation with the entire Department of Defense, all of the personnel, all of the commanders, in order that they can digest the depth of the deceit that occurred here and the violations on a writ large basis that occurred throughout the entire armed forces during the Biden administration. So I'm very encouraged because basically we have two different eras, as you mentioned, of medical mandates for unapproved medical products that were occurring. And our government at a variety, all of the levels of the branches of the government, executive, legislative, and judiciary, have basically concurred that these mandates were illegal.
And your government doesn't care about you. That's why you need a medical emergency kit. It contains life-saving medications like ivermectin, Z-Pak, and antibiotics. Stock them before they block them.
This is a special report.
Knowing how to invest your money is harder than ever before. Dealing with stock market volatility, record debt, and terrorist attacks requires new thinking. At U.S. Asset Management, we can help you see the world more clearly so that you can move beyond the chaos and invest with confidence. Call us, visit us online, or drop by our office. U.S. Asset Management, helping you make better decisions with your money.
And this should drive an important conversation, and if nothing else, keep these medical debacles from happening in the future.
Yeah.
Back to the Bashaw case.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So I mentioned that the Department of Defense had court-martialed 37 and punished thousands during the anthrax fiasco. But with COVID, it was different. You know, I think that they learned lessons inside the Department of Defense that, hey, we really don't want to punish these troops because then they're going to have standing to challenge what we did to them, because they knew that they were blatantly violating the law. So with COVID, they made a concerted effort to not punish anybody except for Lieutenant Bashaw. Yes, they gave adverse consequences, less than fully honorable discharges to almost 10,000 troops, and they coerced out probably tens and tens of thousands of additional troops outside of that 8,700 plus. But with Lieutenant Bashaw, they took an extraordinary step where they essentially had a very politicized court-martial of that young man. He was an Army Public Health Services officer. He was a commander at Aberdeen Proving Ground. And his court-martial was led by one of the Vindman brothers. And ultimately, the judge found him guilty, but the judge actually recommended the case be dismissed, and he imposed no punishment for Lieutenant Bashaw. But the chain of command and the convening authority basically took Judge Cohen's decision and they discarded it. And they went ahead and they imposed the verdict anyway. And then ultimately they ended up discharging him for loss of confidence and lack of promotion. So this incredibly unique, arbitrary, and capricious case of one soldier being punished in the Department of Defense over COVID because they knew that they didn't really want to punish anybody. And so with Lieutenant Bashaw, they actually did not court-martial him over his vaccine refusal, and instead just made it a court-martial over other emergency use authorized countermeasures, testing, and masking. But the problem is the law, and I mentioned the law 1107, which related to anthrax vaccine. The subset law 1107A under Title 10 talks about emergency use authorized products. And you have the option to accept or refuse any emergency use authorized product. It is not specific to vaccines. So the testing and the masking, and that was the essence of Lieutenant Bashaw's case, is he should have had the option to accept or refuse those products as well. And he was correct. And the judge did recommend dismissing the case. And the judge did impose no punishment. So the judge got it. Unfortunately, the convening authority in Army 2-star Major General Edmondson did not. And they ended up doing the extremely vindictive punishment against him, imposing the verdict, and then ultimately discharging him from the Army. And so as a part of corrections, I think it would be very important for the Secretary of Defense to take this one case and essentially expunge that verdict and definitely return that young man to service and make him whole, give him the promotion that he lost, give him another promotion as far as I'm concerned. He's one of the very few people that stood up.
Put him in command. Yeah. I mean,
And so that would be, I think, a very important part of the conversation and part of the the get well process for the Department of Defense to take this singular case and show it for what it was and actually implement Judge Cohen's recommendation and dismiss it, expunge that verdict. it makes me remember back with anthrax vaccine. I mean, they court-martialed a lot of people. A couple of them were very, very important. Major Sonny Bates, a pilot at Dover Air Force Base, Captain John Buck, a physician at Keesler Air Force Base. They court-martialed these guys and they punished these guys. And in anthrax, it was a kind of a similar despicable process where they didn't even allow in these court-martials there to be any evidence included about the illegality of the order. And instead, these court-martial kangaroo courts ended up being just about, did you refuse the order? Yes, guilty. Not, did you refuse the order? Why did you refuse the order? Because it was an unlawful order, sir. That evidence was
that goes to the fundamental tenets of the UCMJ. You're not supposed to enforce an illegal order or unlawful order.
Correct. In Articles 90 and 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice and the Manual Court Martial make very clear that patently illegal orders have to be refused. So all of these soldiers in the anthrax era and in the COVID era actually did their duty. This is the conversation that the American people need to understand, that when the Department of Defense comes at you with rhetoric about soldiers have to follow orders, that's actually not the full story. The full story is soldiers are trained and their ethics lessons are learned from their earliest training, that they actually have to disobey patently illegal orders, which both the anthrax and the COVID mandates were. So anyway, we're very fortunate that the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive branch have all come to these various determinations that these orders were illegal. It should drive in a very important national conversation, but a seriously important ethical conversation within the United States Armed Forces. And so I'm hopeful. I'm encouraged. I'm proud of our leaders. I'm very proud of Secretary of Defense Hegseth because he's been tap dancing around the issue for a while, talking about the experimental vaccines. So you could tell that he got it, right? And when he came out and said that the COVID shot mandate was unlawful, that was not an easy decision for him to make. It was obviously something that people within the Department of Defense probably didn't want him to make that declaration. I mean, think about it. There are literally 3 to 4 decades worth of military officials who have been unfortunately imposing, supporting, pushing vindictively these illegal medical mandates. The last thing they wanted was the top guy in the Department of Defense to verify that it was all unlawful.
No, it was a seminal moment, and I saw the chats just light up with joy among all the military who had been harmed by this. But to your point, we were talking before this, he has been targeted because of this, or before he left this, put this out. There was 5 dismissals within DoD related to his staff or associated with it, or that knew him. So it's obvious there's some drama going on behind the scenes over this. Am I right?
Well, I would imagine so. I'm not inside the puzzle palace at this point, but these issues are near and dear to my heart. I'm proud of Secretary of Defense Hegseth. I think it's it would defy common sense and logic to think that there weren't entities within the Department of Defense that would have done anything to keep him from making these statements. But, the most important part is that our commander-in-chief, our president, Donald Trump, has backed up Secretary Hegseth. And so that's very important that he's got the resolute support of our president, and that we back him up on making this historic determination.
Anything else you want to get out, Tom, as far as related to this subject?
No, you've been gracious to listen in the past. I'm grateful for President Trump listening back in 2016 to 2018 timeframe for trying to correct anthrax records. I'm hoping that they will use this opportunity to reinvigorate those corrections that were undermined by the Department of Defense. I was grateful, 20 plus years ago that we had people like H. Ross Perot, Karl Rove, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, his undersecretaries, a lot of people in the Congress that were listening to us and ended up, validating our concerns about the illegality of the anthrax mandate. It's unfortunate that we haven't had these national conversations to make sure that this didn't happen again. it did happen again. So that's why it's so important that we have the national conversation now, particularly within the Department of Defense, so that they're able to digest the importance of what's transpired.
So last question, what is the next milestone we should be looking for in all this, do you think?
So I guess I've alluded to it, the anthrax record corrections. You got to go back. You've created this precedent of the COVID corrections. And so you basically have to, based on that standard, you have to go back and you have to unilaterally, unconditionally, retroactively expunge the adverse personnel actions that happened during the patently illegal anthrax mandate and upgrade those discharges. There were a lot of less than honorable, bad conduct, dishonorable, other than honorable discharges during that time frame. They all need to be corrected. They are zero cost. It doesn't cost them anything to correct that paper. They have the list in 2001 as a modification to the National Defense Authorization Act under Title 10, Section 1178. The Congress ordered the Department of Defense to track who they punished over anthrax. So they have the list, and if they didn't compile the list, then they need to comply with the law now and compile the list and send everybody a newly minted, fully upgraded, fully honorable discharge. So that's the main event. I think the COVID corrections are well underway. Our Secretary of Defense gets it. He's listened. Yeah. Our President of the United States gets it. So within the executive branch and the Department of Defense, they are well on track to doing the right thing. I think it would be beneficial. They know that they have a very intelligent, qualified group of professional military former officers and current officers that are well versed on these issues and know how to help them correct these records. I think that they need to call upon those folks. There's been an initiative by some of them in creating a document called COMCAP, which is basically the COVID mandates for anthrax and COVID vaccines, and basically helping the Department of Defense to correct the records. I think you need to call upon those people, bring in that team, make it as expeditious as possible, rather than using the traditional mechanisms within the Department of Defense, the Air Force, Army, Navy, Coast Guard corrections boards. Those can take years, and the clock is ticking. I think it would be important to either just correct everything unilaterally and get it done, or form a committee of people that know that what needs to be done, that can do it in a more expeditious manner than the corrections boards, which tend to kick the can for 12, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years. It takes years for those corrections boards to act. Not to mention, there's up to 100,000 troops that are going to be asking to have their records corrected and their career setbacks remedied. There needs to be a panel of these very competent military members, current and former, that know what needs to be done, and I think we'll be able to fix it most expeditiously for our Secretary of Defense.
Well, it's no cost for the military to fix it, but it's a big cost for those who got dishonorable discharges. People don't realize how that could impact your life, and it's like getting, a prison record almost. If you go to get a job or whatever, it's a problem. Anyway.
Yeah, and anthrax veterans have been carrying that burden for almost 3 decades. It's time to make it right. And one standard for correcting records is simply the passage of time. They could go ahead and correct anthrax era veterans records just based on the passage of time. But fortunately, we have an illegality ruling by the federal courts, uncontested by the government. Fortunately, we have a congressional report saying it was illegal. There's ample basis to correct those records unquestionably, unconditionally, and obviously now they're doing the same for the COVID era veterans. So I'm pretty encouraged. Everything is on a good vector. But time, the problem is that they need to do it more expeditiously than they've done it in the past. No more kicking the can.
Gotcha, Colonel. Thank you very much for your time. We'll have you back soon as this progresses. Appreciate it.
Take care, son. Bye-bye.